Hello everyone and welcome to another video, Talking Geeky Stuff with me, Tenchi. And today's video is another comic book artist focus. This time is J Scott Campbell, or Jeffrey Scott Campbell. Now he's another artist that I got introduced to in the early 90s, or would you say mid 90s, under Jim Lee. So under Jim Lee's production at that time was called Homage Studios. If I remember correctly, he was 1994, around that time. Just like my last video when I spoke about Travis Terrace, where he came a little bit after, the Jim Lee, the McFarlane, the Mark Silvestris, and so on. And of course, the comic that introduced me to him was Gen 13. That time, I was just eating up whatever Image Comics was feeding me, but mostly it was Homage Comics, which later on become Wildstorm Productions, and now under DC Comics. Because I felt that Wildstorm, I think they were the biggest studios, production company, that and McFarlane. But of course, McFarlane was just mostly focused on Spawn. But of course, Jimmy Wildstorm Productions had many other comics. So I think he had the most artists under his studio. So Gen 13, like a lot of Image Comics at that time, started off with a miniseries around the 4 to 5 issue mark. So I remember it was about 1994, and I read it and really enjoyed it because the characters were teenagers, kind of around the 16, 17, 18-year-old mark. They were possibly like the offsprings of a group called Team 7, a military group who did a lot of black ops, who got exposed to a science experiment which produced powers. And these are their offsprings, and they started to develop powers. Kind of like a X-Men or New Mutants. But of course, they wasn't allowed to use the word mutants, because that was for Marvel. So I remember, of course, reading it. I thought it was fun. Artwork was good. I think he was one of the youngest artists at that time. He was around 19, 20 years old doing it. Of course, his art was good at that time, but you can clearly see there was a lot of room for improvement. Like, for example, sometimes he did certain faces at an odd angle, and sometimes his proportions and of characters, was a bit out of place sometimes. Then, so after the 5 issues, then the ongoing series came out a year later, and straight away, when I saw the ongoing series, the first thing I noticed was, well, okay, his artwork's improved. The colors improved, of course. Technology improved overall. The coloring improved. His artwork's improved. And a lot of things that I mentioned, like his faces at some odd angle, vastly improved. The body proportions greatly improved, especially his female characters. And that's one thing you will notice in these images, that a lot of them, majority of them, will have a female front and center because he is actually one of the best at drawing female characters, as you'll find out in a minute. So after Gen 13, I think he went on for about the 20 plus issue, and I think him and someone called Joe Madureira and another guy formed a studio called Cliffhanger. It was still under Jim Lee's production, Wildstorm, at that time. And then he created his own comic, his own story. Speaking of that, he also co-created Gen 13 as well. So, but this one, he kind of co-created with his friend, his writer, what's his name again? Andy something, to create Danger Girl. And Danger Girl was kind of like a James Bond / Charlie's Angels female-centric kind of comic, which is great. And of course, when that came out, you can clearly see his artwork improved again, another leap, especially in the female style. I mean, just looking at some of the visuals here, you can clearly see how the women has evolved and become a lot more sexier. And speaking about why he does women very sexy, I remember reading an interview of his in Wizard magazine back in the day. He talked about that he would buy a lot of Playboy magazines to get female references, to get the proportions, the posing, and the way they look. You can clearly see that, of course. I remember him talking about that. His wife doesn't like it. I kind of don't blame her, really. There is one thing that I won't say is a criticism, but I would say that as good as he is with women, it's a shame that his men are not as good as his women are. I mean, don't get me wrong, he does men good, but they're very cartoony or very comedic. A lot of his male characters really have that kind of Bruce Campbell essence to it, to a point where he actually did a mini-series of Army of Darkness starring Bruce Campbell. I mean, even Danger Girl crossed over with Bruce Campbell. They have that kind of Ben Stiller, Bruce Campbell kind of look, you know, not so much Jim Lee or Mark Silvestri where they look more heroic and dynamic. So while I was putting this together, I was searching online for a lot of his artwork. I noticed he did a lot of course, Image stuff, of course, his own stuff, and a lot of Marvel. I didn't really see that many DC stuff because I kind of stopped after only. I think I got the first wave of Danger Girl, and I stopped after that. I kind of stopped comics. There was a big gap when I stopped comics, and so I didn't know what he was doing. I mean, I'll keep an eye on here and there. I know that he did a lot of covers for Marvel and DC and so on. Speaking about male characters, there's one character that pretty good, Spider-Man. Not Peter Parker, I would say Spider-Man, as in Spider-Man in his spider suit, because his style lends that really kind of stretchy and quirky kind of poses. I think that really lends it to Spider-Man's character. When it comes down to, like I said again, comes to women, I remember he's been a target of a lot of the woke media, or the cancel culture, who's kind of harassing him really about over-sexualizing women in his comics. Okay, I'm not going to deny he does really sexy women, and you can clearly see, and a lot of his comics will have female characters. It's front and center as a main character. He does look at the covers. You have a female front and center. He'll probably exaggerate the proportions a little bit, make them all good, pouty lips, nice curves, and so on. So on one side, he's making female front and center. A lot of his characters are female centric, so that's a good thing, right? We need more female in comics. But at the same time, does he deserve all that harassment? Because you can say that about comic book in general, how they, for example, over-exaggerate men. I mean, look at all the superheroes. Do you really feel that all men are like Captain America? Batman, Superman, Thor. Even look at some of the X-Men characters, like Archangel, Cyclops, Bishop. They're all over 6 foot. 6-packs, So you can kind of argue the point saying that, well, if you over-sexualize women, but you also exaggerate men. Because not all men are like that, right? So it kind of works both ways. You just can't say for one and leave the other, right? But hey, that's just me, I just like good art. If I was a good artist like him, why would I draw, I don't know, someone who's short, overweight, not good looking? you're going to start drawing things that's pleasing to the eye, right? And besides, it's comics. It's a fantasy world. Really? Like I said, you don't go around complaining about comic book men are over-sexualized when they have 6 packs and over 6 foot. Because not all men are like that either, you know what I mean? So it kind of works both ways. And, of course, just to end this presentation with the female characters, he does do some of the best female art out there. I would say him and Jim Lee are really neck and neck. I would say still Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri does the best male characters, very dynamic, very heroic, you know. I would say Campbell would do female in that kind of, how do you say it, really curvy, very sensual, not sexual, sensual, you know, kind of exaggerated, kind of playmate style. Hence, how he got references from Playbook. Where Jim Lee does, women still got the same, you know, the curvy, beautiful, but they're more kind of dynamic and they look like superheroes. They look that they can actually kick your ass, you know. So that's the difference. So it depends on what kind of style you like. I like them both. Hey. So anyway, enough talk about that. Please let me know if you are a fan of J Scott Campbell. Do you think he over-sexualized women? Or do you think you can't be just one-sided? If you're gonna complain about his women, you got to complain about how comic artists over-exaggerate men as well. You know, you can't have it both ways, right? Or one way. You can't do just one. You got to do to the other. It's got to be fair. But let me know. Are you a big fan of his work? And please consider subscribing to this channel just to hear me talk about geeky stuff. Well, anyway, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And please stay safe. Goodbye.